Welcome back to the deep dive. We are here to take that overwhelming, just fire hose of modern information,
All of it.
the dense stacks of sources, and really distill them. Get to the essential high-impact knowledge you need to navigate the world more effectively.
And today, we're not really looking at the external environment. So no market trends, no geopolitical shifts.
Yeah.
We are focusing intensely on the internal environment. I mean, your most critical and honestly often overlooked resource.
Yeah.
We're talking about the preservation of what we're going to call your mental inheritance, that foundational strength, the clarity, the wisdom you need to succeed consistently.
Exactly. And the premise we're starting with today is, well, it's a bit stark. But it is so incredibly important for anyone operating in these high-stakes, competitive, or just plain complex fields.
It really is.
It's this idea that every single interaction, whether it's a detailed client review, an internal policy debate, even just managing a team conflict, every single one carries a psychological price tag.
A price tag. That's a great way to put it. It's a cost. And it's measured in your attention, your energy, your emotional bandwidth.
Right?
And if you're not deliberate, if you're not deeply intentional about managing that cost, you just inevitably find yourself running on fumes. You lose those essential resources, that mental inheritance that you need for sustained focus, for innovation, for serious knowledge acquisition. You simply cannot solve complex problems when you're cognitively depleted.
And that's why we're diving into this powerful framework today. It's drawn from some really unique source material, excerpts from Purity of Intent and the Preservation of Mental Inheritance by Nisa Pasha.
And her perspective is just so insightful because it comes from operating on like a razor's edge. She works as a political mental health peer counselor and educator.
That operational context is absolutely key, isn't it?
It's everything. She's not just sitting in an office somewhere. Her experience literally spans the intersection of community health rooms.
Right, where it's all about direct grassroots support, empathy.
Deep empathy. And then in the same day, she's in these high-stakes policy roundtables engaging with, entrenched bureaucratic structures and a lot of political maneuvering.
That dual experience is fascinating. I mean, it means she sees firsthand how personal trauma and unresolved emotional stuff, how it manifests in both the vulnerable person seeking help and the powerful person who's crafting the policy.
Exactly. As she notes, these are environments where people's motives, their traumas, their insecurities, their cultural lenses, all of that actively shapes every single behavior and decision. The stakes are just profoundly high.
So the world she's describing is it's incredibly complex. It's rife with these unspoken power dynamics, political alliances, hidden agendas.
And for you, the learner, the professional, the person who's just seeking mental clarity and that sustained focus, these environments, whether it's the corporate office or a civic organization, they are probably the greatest constant threat to your equilibrium.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to equip you with what is basically a high-level psychological survival skill. It's the awareness you need, rooted in assessing intent and power dynamics, and not to judge other people, but to protect your own mental clarity and emotional grounding.
This is the resource she's defining as your mental inheritance.
Right.
And this goes so far beyond your conventional soft skills. This is about understanding the psychological architecture of the environment you are in.
Architecture, I like that.
It is. It's recognizing the hidden motives that drive behavior, evaluating the systems at play, and then establishing concrete boundaries that are built on an informed assessment.
Okay, so let's unpack this central thesis. Why does Pasha insist that we have to assess intent, that internal compass, and not just, judge based on actions or results? Why can't we just look at what people do?
Well, because actions, especially in these high-stakes environments and these really hierarchical structures, are so often performative.
Performative.
In the policy and health worlds Pasha is navigating, people's actions are often filtered through layers of systemic fear or the need to maintain control, protect your reputation, or just ensure compliance.
So they might look supportive on the surface.
They might appear incredibly supportive, but their underlying motive is actually self-preservation within that structure.
And if you misread that situation, if you take an action that's really driven by systemic fear or just career survival, and you interpret it as a malicious personal attack, you make a huge error.
The critical error.
You end up spending all your cognitive and emotional energy fighting the wrong battle. You exhaust yourself fighting a symptom instead of understanding the root cause.
And that's exactly why she says intent assessment is the foundation of mental preservation. It allows you to allocate your energy correctly. It's about efficiency. The cost of misinterpretation is just. It's staggering. It leads directly to unnecessary conflict and this profound emotional drain.
All right, let's really delve into the core argument the source lays out. This idea that understanding an individual's purity of intent, their behavioral patterns, their relationship to power, that it's not a luxury.
No, not at all.
It's framed as a crucial survival skill. And I want to push on that word, survival. Why does she elevate this kind of emotional triage to, survival status?
Because the failure to accurately read the room or the system or the individual, it doesn't just lead to like an awkward meeting.
Right.
It leads to a resource depletion that genuinely threatens your ability to function. In Pasha's world, whether she's counseling a vulnerable person or trying to influence a policy decision, motives that are hidden or contaminated by ego or trauma or bias, they directly result in damaging outcomes.
And if you engage without doing that assessment first,
You risk taking on that damage yourself. You absorb it.
she describes her operational context as just incredibly taxing. You have these community health rooms which require this deep, empathetic engagement.
Total empathy.
And then that's juxtaposed against policy roundtables, which demand this objective, sometimes even cynical analysis. It sounds like a constant state of hypervigilance.
Yeah.
A psychological minefield.
It is a psychological minefield where every single interaction has these hidden emotional levers, and that constant high-level evaluation is necessary simply because the stakes are so high.
So the counselor isn't just listening to the words being said.
No, not at all. She's analyzing the underlying architecture of the whole interaction, the systems, the histories, and especially those unspoken power dynamics that really define how people show up.
So she has to assess not just what is being said, but why it's being said.
And what psychological cost that participation is extracting from her, from everyone.
And that leads us directly to the core lesson she pulled from all this work, what she calls the hard truth.
Yeah.
Every interaction carries a psychological price tag. It's like a hidden toll booth on your mental highway.
That's a perfect analogy. It really is. Because the payment isn't money. It's your attention. It's your bandwidth. It's your emotional labor.
And the implication here that I find so fascinating is that your energy, your clarity, your emotional labor, they are finite. They're highly limited resources.
Absolutely. And for you, the learner, whose success literally hinges on sustained intellectual focus and deep knowledge acquisition, you have to guard these resources fanatically.
Let's expand on that a little bit. The specific costs of this psychological price tag, it's more than just feeling tired at the end of the day, right? What are the concrete tolls we're paying when we engage with what she calls contaminated intent?
Well, there are several really critical costs. The first one is decision fatigue.
Okay.
If you spend hours of your day just trying to decipher a colleague's passive-aggressive email or a system's contradictory rules, you just have less mental bandwidth for the real high-level strategic decisions in your own core job.
You've used it all up on the small stuff.
Exactly. The second is what she'd call emotional residue. Negative interactions leave this sticky layer of stress or anxiety or resentment that then contaminates your subsequent interactions, even the positive ones.
So it bleeds into the rest of your day.
It does. And third, and this is maybe the most critical for the learner, is the loss of creative bandwidth. Innovation and complex problem solving require a clear, spacious mind. Processing someone else's emotional waste. It compresses that space. It makes breakthroughs much less likely.
So if every day we are drawing down our cognitive capital, we're spending our resources cleaning up emotional spillover from team members or trying to figure out why a policy is intentionally contradictory, we are actively undermining our own focus. We're jeopardizing our own goals.
It becomes a zero-sum game for mental energy.
Yep.
Precisely. And that realization, it mandates the next step in her framework, which the author calls strategic exclusion.
Okay, this is where I want to introduce some intellectual friction. Because the source says, and I'm quoting here, not everyone deserves access to your clarity, your emotional labor, or your inheritance of knowledge and strength. In a world that's always praising radical collaboration and empathy, this idea of strategic exclusion, it sounds, I don't know, almost cold. Aren't we just isolating ourselves or maybe just labeling anyone who's difficult as contaminated?
And that's a critical question to ask. But Pasha clarifies that strategic exclusion is not about isolation or making a moral judgment. It's a clinical resource management strategy.
Resource management.
Yes. If someone's intent is consistently contaminated, meaning it's driven by ego or repeated blame shifting or manipulation, then allowing them access to your finite mental resources is just. It's fundamentally detrimental to your primary mission, which is maintaining your clarity and your effectiveness.
So it's reframing boundaries. They're not just a defensive measure anymore. They're an active, almost offensive strategy for success.
Exactly. It's the difference between self-defense and strategic deployment. You are strategically preserving your internal peace and focus precisely so you can engage effectively in the battles that do matter.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because if you're constantly depleted by these contaminated contacts, you have nothing left. Nothing to dedicate to your truly important partners or your most important projects.
We often equate success and focus with, doing more, with pushing through everything. But the core insight here seems to be that success often depends on doing less, specifically engaging less with draining or contaminated energy.
It's a conservation mindset, and this preservation tactic, it has to extend beyond just the individuals to the systems they operate within. The author really emphasizes that the peer counselor role requires analyzing not just people,
but also evaluating the systems, the histories, and the unspoken power dynamics that shape behavior. She calls this systemic evaluation.
Yes.
So why is evaluating the system so key to personal preservation?
Because systems, whether we're talking corporate HR, government bureaucracy, a hospital, they are usually designed with an underlying agenda.
Which is?
Order, control, and maintaining the hierarchy. And if you mistake a system's rigid limitation for a personal failing on your part, or a colleague's compliance with a flawed process as malicious intent, you will exhaust yourself fighting the structure itself. And even worse, you internalize the harm.
Can you give us a professional example of that?
Absolutely. Imagine you're working with a cross-functional team, and a key department just continually misses its deadlines.
Okay, classic problem.
Right. So if you don't perform that systemic evaluation, you just conclude that the department manager is incompetent or malicious. You engage in conflict. You accuse them of failure. And the psychological price tag is enormous. Frustration, anger, a damaged relationship.
But if you apply the systemic lens instead,
you might discover the manager is operating under, say, a ridiculously outdated software system that was never properly funded. Or maybe they're constrained by a massive, unavoidable regulatory compliance burden. So their actions, the missed deadlines, are a function of systemic conditioning, not personal intent. Recognizing that allows you to stop fighting the individual and either strategize around the systemic constraint or simply accept the limit without internalizing the failure.
That feels like a massive psychological relief. It stops you from taking on institutional failure as personal failure.
Exactly.
You recognize the chaos is inherent to the system, not a flaw in your ability to navigate it or some personal slight against you. And that clarity, that saves your cognitive bandwidth.
Okay, so we've established the necessity of assessment and the very high cost of emotional labor. Now let's move to the operational definition of purity of intent. This is really the toolkit for assessing that internal compass of an individual or even a collective.
And it's important to repeat what we noted earlier, right? The author is very quick to clarify. Purity does not mean someone is perfect.
No.
Or morally flawless, or that they always behave impeccably. This is not about moral judgment.
Absolutely not. Purity here refers to whether the actions they take are honest and consistent and aligned with their stated purpose, or if their behaviors are driven primarily by projection, manipulation, or unresolved emotional pain.
Which is what we're calling contamination.
That's a contamination.
I really appreciate the distinction she uses. It's between a person's authenticity, is their presence in the interaction psychologically clean and direct, versus the contamination, which is that residue of ego or fear or manipulation or projection.
And that contamination is the residue that transfers to you and forces you to spend that mental inheritance.
So what did that residue actually look like in a standard professional interaction?
Well, often it manifests as just subtle undermining.
Okay.
Someone gives you praise that is immediately followed by a qualification. Or they subtly shift blame for a past failure onto other people.
Right.
Or they express passive aggression that's disguised as constructive concern.
Right, I'm just trying to help.
Exactly. The interaction leaves you feeling vaguely unsettled, and it forces you to use your mental energy to decode the real message behind the words. That effort.
Yeah.
That's the psychological price tag you're paying.
So in mental health and peer support, this principle is crucial. Behaviors are often influenced by underlying trauma, fear, stress, or past experiences with power and control. So if someone is acting out of unresolved fear, that isn't true. Integrity-based intention, it's a reaction, it's a spillover. And that spillover contaminates the whole environment.
And the key to decoding this intent is pattern recognition. It's about matching words to deeds over time. Consistency is what provides the reliable signal.
So we can break down the practical assessment criteria into two primary types of intent that the peer counselor is looking for.
We can. First, the alignment we're all seeking. Integrity-grounded intent.
Okay. An integrity-grounded intent is characterized by open communication, clarity about objectives, respect for boundaries, and this is crucial, taking full responsibility for one's impact.
Even if the negative consequence was unintended.
Exactly. They own the consequence, not just their motive.
And then you have the red flag, conflict spillover intent. This is signaled when there's a constant structural misalignment.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure, it's when someone says they value collaboration but then repeatedly fails to share critical information. Or they preach transparency but use private channels to undermine decisions. They shift blame, they create confusion, or they might even actively weaponize their own vulnerability.
Wait, what does that mean, weaponize vulnerability?
It's when someone uses their own past struggles or traumas as a way to avoid current responsibility. Like, you can't criticize my work because I've been through so much. It shuts down legitimate feedback.
Ah, I see. So that misalignment is the flashing red light. It signals that there's internal chaos, the conflict or emotional distress that is now bleeding onto your clarity.
It is.
You have a manager, for example, who constantly talks about delegation and empowerment, but then they micromanage every single email and demand instant updates on every minor task.
Right. And that cognitive dissonance between their words and their deeds is psychologically exhausting to reconcile. It forces you to spend your precious resources trying to navigate two conflicting realities at the same time.
And the energy drain comes from trying to predict which reality they're going to operate from moment to moment, the stated purpose or the hidden fear.
Exactly.
So to make this assessment really concrete and actionable for you listening, the source lists the specific check-in questions that the political mental health peer counselor makes upon any engagement. This is basically a rapid triage system for emotional and mental safety.
They're powerful, internalized questions that really cut through the noise, and they represent a fundamental shift from, open acceptance to strategic evaluation. Let's walk through a few and see how they apply professionally.
Okay, first one. Who walks in with honesty? That sounds simple, but honesty here means more than just not lying.
Right. It means they're presenting their actual agenda clearly. They aren't hiding a need for control behind a facade of help or disguising an interest in self-promotion as team collaboration.
Okay. Second, who carries emotional waste? This is that contamination factor we were talking about.
In a professional setting, this might be the person who opens every meeting by venting about their personal stressors, or who projects their own fear of failure onto the project's complexity, demanding endless reassurances from the team.
They're handing you their waste and expecting you to process it.
Yes. And the learner, who is focused on maximizing their professional output, must realize that accepting that emotional waste is an absolute barrier to focus. If you're busy processing someone else's unmanaged fear, you cannot maintain sharp focus on your own complex tasks.
Right. Okay, third and fourth. Who brings solutions? Who brings chaos? This is the productivity test.
Are they actively contributing to the resolution, or are they just introducing instability, creating conflict where none existed, or requiring just excessive effort simply to manage their presence in the room?
And then finally, the ultimate resource management test. Who will drain me? Who will partner with me?
A partner contributes to your mental inheritance. They add clarity, they add wisdom, emotional support. A drainer, no matter how capable they might seem on paper, subtracts from it.
That distinction is so often subtle, because drainers don't always look incompetent, do they?
Not at all. A high-performing but severely needy colleague who requires excessive emotional validation after every successful task is still a net drain, even if the task itself was completed brilliantly.
So the counselor is looking for efficiency of interaction.
She's looking for engagement that supports her purpose rather than depletes her energy.
In this concept, it fundamentally empowers the learner. Understanding intent doesn't mean you're judging them as good or bad.
No.
It just allows for an informed, calculated decision about access. You're deciding how much access they get to your time, your energy, and your personal information.
And that is the critical shift to self-protection. It pulls your focus away from the exhausting, often impossible task of trying to change or fix other people, and it redirects it entirely toward protecting your own mental stability.
So when you accurately assess purity of intent, you support safer relationships, clearer communication, and more intentional engagement.
Especially in professional systems where, let's be honest, genuine respect isn't always a guarantee.
Okay, so we've established the lens for assessing individual intent. But now we have to apply that lens to the hardest environments.
Right.
The rigid, powerful structures, the corporate ladder, healthcare systems, political bodies. This is where individual intent gets truly distorted and contaminated by, well, the fear of authority.
The source calls this the distorting power of hierarchy. When power is uneven, the behavior of those in authority and those who serve it just changes drastically.
How so?
Well, a manager may genuinely want to support their team, but if the company culture or the regulatory environment demands absolute compliance, their actions will end up prioritizing control and reputation over that stated goal of support.
And so the person on the receiving end just gets these mixed messages.
Constant mixed messages.
The company mission statement says, we value innovation and risk-taking, but the manager enforces a zero-tolerance policy for even minor mistakes. They say all the right supportive things.
But their underlying motive is self-preservation within the hierarchy. And that dissonance is psychologically corrosive. It creates this immense confusion, and it undermines self-confidence.
Yeah, can you see that?
This is why Pasha's analysis is so critical, particularly for vulnerable populations, but the dynamic applies just as much in corporate environments. When the system gives you mixed messages, verbal support, but obstructive behavior, the individual receiving that message often starts to question their own perception.
They start thinking, am I being too sensitive? Did I misunderstand the policy? Is there something wrong with me?
Exactly. And this is a significant, very subtle form of psychological harm because it encourages you to internalize systemic flaws. If the political or professional system tells you it's there to help, but every single interaction makes you feel small or confused or exhausted, that dissonance is a direct daily drain on your mental inheritance.
And this is why the purity of intent is so crucial in the political lens, where the author spends a lot of her time. Politics, she says, is full of hidden motives, alliances, and performative concern.
Authenticity is so often sacrificed at the altar of leverage and reputation.
So if you fail to understand intent in that arena, if you take every stated alliance or every expressed concern at face value, you risk fighting battles that do not belong to you.
And think about the time and energy you waste when you become emotionally invested in a cause or a conflict, only to realize later that the person leading the charge was just using it to gain reputational leverage or to undermine a personal rival.
That is the ultimate depletion of your mental resources.
It is. You've been pulled into someone else's contaminated strategy, dedicating your focus and your clarity to achieving their hidden objective, not your own.
The source also analyzes the nature of these political and institutional environments, that they're built on structure, hierarchy, rules, and control. And health systems are often very similar.
They're systems of order. They prioritize compliance and documentation above almost everything else. And in these systems, the peer educator, or the professional, functions as a bridge, which necessitates this constant triage.
What kind of triage?
You have to recognize who is working in service of the system's stated mission, who is being constrained by its flaws, and who is actively using the system as a tool of control over other people.
That's a really nuanced triage that the learner has to adopt in their own professional life. You know, who is acting rigidly because they are just constrained by fear of the boss, and who is using those same rigid rules to actively control and punish others.
And the distinction dictates your entire engagement strategy. This high level of awareness allows for the essential distinction that restores your clarity and reduces your psychological cost.
Which is separating behaviors driven by personal choice, their true intent, from behaviors shaped by systemic conditioning, fear, or just survival.
Let's deepen that. If a person is acting rudely because they are genuinely malicious, that's personal choice.
And you need to activate strategic exclusion immediately.
Right. But if a highly valuable team member is suddenly rigid and uncommunicative because they just survived a brutal round of layoffs, that's systemic conditioning and fear. Your response has to be fundamentally different.
So you might not be able to easily change their conditioned behavior.
Probably not. But you can understand the constraint. You can apply context. And maybe you can find an alternative pathway that bypasses that pressure point. Crucially, without this separation, it's just so easy to misinterpret actions.
And the consequence of that misinterpretation, as the author states, is profound. You internalize the systemic harm.
You internalize the fear, the chaos, and the failure of the structure as your own lack of competence or worth.
Right. If you believe your coworker hates you when actually they're just terrified of their manager and covering themselves by throwing minor issues your way, you waste enormous energy defending yourself and just stewing in resentment.
Instead of recognizing the system's pressure points, you misdiagnose the interpersonal relationship. And that misunderstanding directly drains the wisdom and the emotional grounding the source identifies as your mental inheritance. It makes you unstable and inefficient.
So the ultimate aim of making the separation is preservation.
Yes. Understanding that while the behavior is real, the malice might be manufactured by the structure, not by the soul. And that knowledge, it acts as a buffer. It prevents you from absorbing all that external stress.
Okay, we've built the foundation. We understand the high cost of engagement, the definition of contaminated intent, and the distortion caused by hierarchy. Now let's focus intensely on the payoff, the practical application for your own personal growth, your mental stability, and maintaining your focus.
So the source really emphasizes that reframing this intent assessment is key. It does not require you to judge other people as good or bad.
It's not a moral judgment.
It's purely an analytical tool for informed decision-making. You're just gathering data to decide where to invest your most valuable resource: your attention, your energy, and your emotional stability.
And this initiates that fundamental shift to self-protection. It pulls the focus away from the, frankly, futile effort of trying to fix contaminated people or broken systems and redirects it toward protecting your own mental stability.
And that skill is just deeply empowering for the professional or the learner. It allows you to recognize when someone else's emotional turmoil is not your responsibility to fix.
Their conflict spillover intent is their own internal battle.
It is, and you are not required to volunteer your clarity, your time, or your energy to fight it for them. You can recognize the source of the chaos without absorbing it.
I want to challenge a common professional misconception here, what the source calls the illusion of strength.
Yes.
We're culturally conditioned to believe that engaging in every conflict, defending every boundary, trying to fix every problem, that this is a sign of resilience.
But the author argues the complete opposite, that constant reactive engagement is a direct path to emotional exhaustion and depletion. It renders you unable to serve yourself or anyone else effectively. True strength, in this context, is the disciplined ability to pause.
To strategically conserve resources.
And to consciously choose not to engage with every contaminated stimulus that comes your way.
So if strength is defined by intentional conservation, then the next step has to be choosing your battles wisely. This is the pause and assess strategy, that moment of triage before you commit your energy.
Right. And the author provides a list of 4 critical questions to ask yourself before you engage in a conflict or a deep interaction. These are like the gates you use to guard your mental inheritance. The learner should really internalize these as a mandatory mental checklist.
Let's go through them. First, does the issue support my purpose or drain my energy? This is the cost-benefit analysis of the psychological price tag.
So if the potential gain, like resolving a minor annoyance, is completely outweighed by the guaranteed cost, like 3 days of emotional processing,
You minimize your engagement.
you have to. And this needs to be applied ruthlessly in a professional context. If a debate is rooted in personal ego rather than factual accuracy, and engaging means 3 emails and a tense meeting, the drain on your creative bandwidth is just not worth the temporary satisfaction of being right. If it's pure drain, you must strategically disengage.
Okay, second question. Is it rooted in a systemic problem or a personal projection? This applies the clarity from the last section.
So if a colleague is resisting a new process, you have to determine if that resistance is a deep-seated personality flaw, a personal projection, or if it's a necessary friction caused by the inadequacy of the system itself, a systemic problem.
And this determines your action.
Absolutely. Systemic problems require strategic engagement with the structure. Maybe you escalate the issue, or you find workarounds. Personal projection requires strategic disengagement from that individual's emotional waste. Maybe you limit future one-on-one interactions. Misdiagnosing this means you waste time trying to console a projectionist or trying to discipline someone who's just constrained by a rigid system.
Okay, third, is the individual acting from integrity or from unresolved emotional distress? This is the purity of intent filter.
Integrity allows for partnership, for constructive criticism. Distress, trauma, or that conflict spillover signals contamination and high emotional labor requirements.
And the difference is accountability.
That's it. If they act from integrity, they'll correct their course when their impact is negative. If they're acting from unresolved distress, they'll likely shift blame, double down, or require you to manage their emotional fallout indefinitely. You have to assess the pattern, not the isolated incident.
And the fourth question, will engagement lead to understanding and growth, or will it just pull me into ongoing emotional harm? This is the future casting question. It's asking, what is the historical trajectory of interacting with this person or this system?
And if the historical pattern suggests that the engagement will only lead to further depletion, further exposure to contamination, or just no resolution of the core problem, then the only logical choice for the successful learner is preservation.
You have to accept that some issues cannot be resolved by your intervention.
And that your highest priority must be your own mental stability.
Following this process is how you actively define and protect what she calls your mental inheritance. And this is such a crucial concept, we should probably dedicate some time to defining its components clearly. It's not just your intellectual capacity, is it?
No, it's so much deeper and more interconnected to your overall performance. The source identifies 4 core elements that make up this valuable and limited resource that you have to strategically preserve.
Okay. The first is clarity. This is your ability to see the path ahead, to distinguish reality from performance, and to maintain a clear objective without the fog of contamination or emotional residue.
And when your clarity is eroded, your decision-making suffers badly. Second is intuition.
That gut feeling.
That internal sense of warning, the gut feeling, the subtle guidance that tells you when a person or a situation is risky. And this is the resource that gets shouted down by ego, by social pressure, or by all the emotional noise generated by constant conflict. Contamination just dulls that intuitive signal.
Okay, third is wisdom.
This is the distilled knowledge you've acquired through experience, the pattern recognition that saves you time. But if you're constantly processing novel emotional chaos caused by contamination, you can't efficiently apply the wisdom you already possess.
And the fourth is emotional grounding.
This is the stability that allows you to absorb professional setbacks, criticism, and systemic turbulence without losing your structural integrity or your focus. When you allow contaminated intent access to your inner world, you erode all 4 of these pillars simultaneously. It makes sustained focus and knowledge acquisition almost impossible.
So if you, the learner, are focused on mastering a new field or successfully navigating a complex project, you need maximum clarity and intuition.
You do.
Emotional exhaustion is the direct path to poor judgment and lost focus. And it doesn't matter how intelligent or capable you are.
Which brings us to the final, most actionable strategy. Boundaries as strategy. Protecting this inheritance through intentional boundaries is not passive avoidance, it is strategic preservation. It's an essential mental health skill.
Let's just distinguish between avoidance and strategic preservation one last time. Avoidance is running from something, often because of fear.
Right.
Strategic preservation is intentionally managing the gates to your mind and your energy based on a calculated assessment of that psychological price tag. It's an active, powerful choice.
And this level of awareness, it fundamentally supports safer relationships, clearer communication, and more intentional engagement. By meticulously assessing intent and setting boundaries, you are ensuring that when you do engage, which is necessary for success, you do so from a position of full strength, maximum capacity, and complete emotional grounding.
Not from a place of chronic depletion.
Exactly.
This shifts the entire paradigm. You stop reacting reflexively to every contaminated stimulus and you start proactively managing your internal landscape based on a calculated risk assessment of the potential drain on your mental inheritance. That is true psychological power. Hashtag tag outro.
So we've spent this time really exploring Nisa Pasha's framework, understanding the high psychological cost of engagement, and developing the tools for assessing purity of intent in these really complex personal and professional systems.
Let's try to synthesize the critical takeaways for the learner. First, intent is revealed when actions match words. Any systemic misalignment is a huge red flag signaling internal conflict or emotional spillover.
Which guarantees a drain on your mental capital.
Second, power dynamics in hierarchical systems distort behavior. You have to separate behaviors driven by personal choice from those that are just shaped by systemic conditioning or fear.
And failure to draw that line leads directly to self-blame and to internalized harm.
And finally, your mental stability relies on strategic boundary setting, not on constant exhaustive conflict. True strength is found in the intentional conservation of your mental inheritance.
Clarity, intuition, wisdom, and emotional grounding.
Right. Use that pause and assess strategy to decide whether or not to engage.
And the immense utility of this awareness is really the reduction of self-blame. When you're navigating complex, rigid systems, understanding the hidden motives and the structural constraints of others allows you to accurately place the responsibility for the chaos or the harm outside of yourself. It preserves your psychological equilibrium.
In a world built on ambiguous systems, political posturing, and hidden motives, understanding purity is absolutely essential to preserving the inheritance of strength that you carry. The ultimate act of success and personal growth, according to this framework, is the intentional strategic management of access to your mental resources.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, the learner. Think about your current high-stakes environment. Maybe it's your career, a complex project, or a challenging personal relationship. Consider those 4 elements of your mental inheritance: clarity, intuition, wisdom, and emotional grounding.
So the question is this: what are the 3 most valuable components of your personal mental inheritance, and what boundaries must you immediately strengthen to protect them from the psychological price tags of your current interactions?
That's the conservation strategy we urge you to implement today.
We hope this deep dive helps you focus less on fighting irrelevant battles and more on conserving the energy required for true knowledge, profound clarity, and sustained success. We'll see you next time.